Hey everyone, host of Shelves, Jeremy Meyer here. If you like the podcast, I thought I'd recommend a couple others for you. If you want to hear more about unproduced scripts, check out Screenplay Archaeology. If you want to hear some other movie or entertainment-related discussion, check out the Entertainment Buffet podcast. If you're interested in some video game discussion, check out my friends over at the Darkcast and darkstation.com. Also be sure to visit some of our friends of the show, the Nerds and Marks podcast and 616 Entertainment. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Well, 'tis the season. Welcome to the Shelved podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. Now, you're listening to this on the day that is my favorite holiday, which is Halloween. I think it's a lot of people's favorite holiday. It's my favorite time of year. I love the fall. I love October. It is the raddest sounding month. But, excuse me. I wanted to drop a special episode on Halloween. Just because, I planned on getting an early start in October, and unfortunately ended up getting a bit of a late start. I planned to do my Shocktober this year and just did not have time. I had a whole lot of business going on throughout September and stuff when I usually start kind of planning to do Shocktober stuff. But I wanted to do, as much as I could during the month. And, I had some scripts sitting around. I decided to do the Resident Evil scripts, and, managed to get 4 of the scripts and only had 2 weeks left of October. So I decided to, one on Monday, one on the next Monday, and then one on Halloween. And the 4th one, I'm not sure if it's worth looking at yet, but I might cover that one as well in November. But so today we're going to be covering the 4th Resident Evil movie. The only script I couldn't find was the 2nd movie and the last movie, but I don't really want to talk about the last movie anytime soon. So we will kind of look at this as the end of this October run. Considering it's going up on the last day of October, there's not much choice. It's the trilogy of Resident Evil episodes. Skipping the 2nd movie, we did the first movie, Resident Evil. Then we covered Resident Evil Extinction on Monday. And then for Halloween, we're going to talk about Resident Evil Afterlife. It's the 4th movie. It was the first one in 3D. Luckily, the script does not call out the 3D at all. I'm sure that was a thing that was planned a little afterwards or whatever. But luckily we don't have to talk about that because that is one of the worst aspects of the movie. And just feeds into that larger problem of Paul W.S. Anderson as a writer, which is that guy saw The Matrix once and was really mad he didn't make The Matrix. But Resident Evil Afterlife is the last one of these movies that I like. The first 4 are varying degrees of okay at best and not completely terrible at their worst. But the 4th one really rides that line. At the time I had seen it numerous times. It was the last one I saw in the theater. I think I saw 2, 3, 4 in the theater. I missed the first one. I saw 5 when it came out on DVD, and it angered the hell out of me. And then I saw 6 when it was on Blu-ray. Before we get into this movie, because I feel like this one might go a little quick. The thing about these movies is they are paced very quickly. There is some stuff I really want to talk about with this one, because this is one of the movies that... I don't want to spoil it. We'll get to it later. But it's one of the ones that I thought could have been better. And, because of the nature of how the movie was made, it just didn't work out as well. But before this, I thought I would talk about something that I've tried to dig up, but I can only find a kind of little outline inscription of. And that was a Resident Evil movie that was going to be made in the late 90s that never happened, or early 2000s, somewhere in that range. It's known as the Alan B. Mcelroy script, and it was a rejected script for Resident Evil. Apparently this happened somewhere in the 3-year period before Paul W.S. Anderson's script, which, I mean, apparently his first script was actually came together because he was like aware of Resident Evil and he wanted to do his own thing, so he wrote a script that was kind of just called like Undead or something. And, he kind of pitched that as his idea, and then that script kind of got turned into Resident Evil. I believe that's how that kind of came about. But, so, there was the Romero script before, which we covered. It was like our second episode of the podcast, or, an early one. And, the Romero script I enjoyed, but it's definitely a little weird, a little flawed, very B movie. But it was great. And then, that script got rejected. And then somewhere along the line, this Alan B. McElroy script was being shopped around. So this little excerpt I'm about to read, and this is kind of all the information I have on the movie. It's, the script was turned in. This excerpt, it actually came out in PlayStation Magazine in 1998. It was, some article that was just titled Resident Evil, the movie. And basically somebody got a hold of the script and wrote an article for it in PlayStation Magazine. And this is just what their like outline is. And I remember a long time ago, like back when I was on like dial-up internet, I remember reading this and seeing a fake poster that somebody made. And there are two things that have always stuck with me. I should see if I can find that fake poster. It's a really low res image, and if I find it, I'll post it on the Instagram. But there are things that always stuck with me up until the point when that first Resident Evil movie came out. And I remember I was all over the Resident Evil movie website and like digging up information, like, oh man, I want to know more about the Resident Evil movie, because I was, I remember reading this outline and not knowing how movies worked back then, that things changed and blah blah blah, and like even telling some friends like, oh yeah, there's this scene that was described in this, and then none of that happened in the movie. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. This is the article from PlayStation Magazine. It's on the Resident Evil wiki, Resident Evil fandom or whatever, and you can read this too if you want to dig it up. But if you just search Resident Evil McElroy script, that's MCELROY, you'll be led to this page as well. So I'm just going to start off. It all starts off with a disturbance in the Raccoon Forest, where strange animals are mutilating campers and park rangers. A SWAT team is sent in and is quickly destroyed by the mysterious creatures in the forest. At this point, the government gets involved. It recruits Wesker, who is in asylum for a reason that is never explained, to break into a lab in the forest, presumably to rescue some scientists there. Wesker recruits his team members based on their specialties. Barry Burton is the all-around military expert who has retired and now runs a restaurant. Chris Redfield is the expert at combat. Jill Valentine is a munition expert, and Brad Vickers is the medic. Unknown to the rest of the team, however, is that Brad is actually an imposter named Mike. He is trying to find his girlfriend Becky, who was on the original SWAT team sent into the forest. The team sets down in Raccoon Forest and is almost immediately attacked by wild mutated dogs. They make a run for the lab mansion in the middle of the forest and just barely make it there alive. They all get inside of the mansion, and that's where things really heat up. They confront more of the dogs along with giant wasps, tarantulas, and of course, zombies. It's all out tension and action as the group keeps losing members to each new threat and ammo runs lower and lower. Eventually, they find the scientists they are supposed to rescue, and it turns out that the whole situation was an insidious trap. They were there to be infected with the T-virus and then allowed to escape to spread the virus to the rest of the world. Jill and Chris, the only ones left, get a hold of the antidote and escape from the building just as it is exploding, only to be pursued by the tyrant, pursued, spell wrong by the way, who actually turns out to be a mutated Wesker. They finally fight off the tyrant, take the antidote, and walk off into the sunset. So not an entire one-for-one adaptation of the original game, but it is a lot closer to the game than the movie we got. I think the Romero script is honestly better. Just judging from that little synopsis there, but I just thought that was a fun little thing. You know, we read the Romero script. We read an early draft for the first movie, and it's fun to kind of look at, hey, there's this other version that's out there. I would love to get my hands on that draft and just read it in depth and, see what's what. So, that was just, I wanted to cram that in because I feel like this episode might go a little fast. I'm actually recording this just after recording the Resident Evil Extinction episode. It's pretty late on a Sunday, so I'm trying to get this done, and I am trying to get through it. So why don't we just get into it? Resident Evil Afterlife, which is what Resident Evil Extinction was originally going to be called. And they changed the title to Extinction, but kept Afterlife for the next one. So again, I said this in the last episode. I highly recommend watching the movie before jumping into this. Unfortunately, I cannot watch the movie because my Blu-ray is packed away in storage. I wanted to get through these before I recorded these episodes just so I was fresh on what was different in the script and the movie, but unfortunately I'm going off mostly memory here and like the Wikipedia summary and some scenes I pulled up on YouTube just because I couldn't dig out the movies and honestly didn't even have time. But so the opening scene is pretty much the same. So if you recall, the opening of the movie is the very slow motion in the rain with the awesome score going on, which I mentioned this in the last movie. It continues in this one. And I believe these composers scored the 5th movie. I'm not sure if they scored the 6th movie. But I'm trying to see if I can find music by Tom and Andy. It's 2 guys. Yeah, they did the 2 movies. I'm actually checking on their whatchamacallit, Wikipedia right now to see if they did the last one. I don't believe they did. Okay, so they did Retribution and Afterlife. The music is really good for these movies. One thing that always kind of bugged me is I love the score for the first movie. Like, I think the first movie does a decent job at like being a horror film that is completely lost in any of the sequels. And I do think a lot of that has to do with the music, and I love the music in the first movie, and that's one thing that really bugs me is when a franchise can't keep like a theme going. Like, one good thing Avengers did is they never changed the Avengers theme, really. It's always kind of the same thing, and I wish these movies had kind of stuck with the music motif, but each one does kind of have its own feel. But 3, 4, and 5 are all pretty similar, even though 3 has a different composer for the score. But 3 is also pretty similar to the first one. So, 2 is kind of the outlier. That movie is a straight up action film and has kind of just like a generic action score. But the fourth one, it's got a great score, and it's got that same opening scene with just the girl in the rain as, she becomes patient 0 in Japan. And then, we zoom out. We get our little update on the world. My name is Alice, that whole spiel, they kind of run through the movies. And then we zoom back into Japan now in the current timeline, and the city, is decimated by the apocalypse that has ridden the world of life. So this opening scene is a little extended. If you recall, it's, the 2 snipers on the rooftops, and they get taken out by someone, which, at this point we should all know what it is, because this franchise has gotten pretty ridiculous. You can just remember how quaint it was. It's actually one of the reasons why I like going back to watch the first movie, is just because it is so basic. It's like, hey, these are just regular people in a irregular situation, and all of the sequels just more and more try to turn Alice into a superhero. And this one does try to dial it back a little bit, and it's one of the reasons why I do kind of like this movie. So, we do get introduced to Wesker early on, except we get this little scene of him working out, like, oh, look how much of a badass he is. He's got all these back muscles. And they do reveal that his eyes are already red, which is, kind of a problem. I should point out this movie came out right after Resident Evil 5. So there was a lot of stuff from that game kind of just crammed into this movie. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So, the action scene is a little more extended on the surface. If you recall the movie, it's just like the two snipers get killed and then the Alice clones, because yes, there are clones of Alice, break into the laboratory and like kind of take everybody out in the entranceway or whatever. This, like, some of that kind of happens on the surface. Like, there's a huge explosion, like shit gets blown up as they're breaking into the facility, and that's when Wesker kind of goes to his command station and is like, what's going on, and that's when the clones kind of swarm the whole place. So in this in the script, Wesker kind of is already infected with some sort of strain of the virus and kind of has some similar superhuman powers to Alice, which in the movie doesn't happen until later, or if the movie he is already infected, it's unclear. But to me, it seems to be that because after the opening, he's presumed dead. It seems to be whatever happened there, he was able to mutate and get infected afterwards, but the script is just like kind of implies that no, he's already infected at the start of the movie, and somehow he's like superhuman. So he gets injured. His injuries already kind of heal because of his infection. There's the whole action scene with the clones attacking. It's all pretty much the same. Wesker escapes on the VTOL, the plane, which he uninfects Alice. I almost said Alice with the virus, and she loses her abilities. It was similar to the movie, but in the script they do imply that like some of her abilities kind of retain. Like she does have little remnants of power there. It's just not strong enough to really do anything, and it honestly doesn't even play into what else happens in the film. So it's honestly better that they just like say, nah, you're completely cured at the end of the movie, even though the next movie kind of fucking rewrites that. Okay, so yeah, the real Alice is in the VTOL. Wesker is able to use his like super speed, because he's infected, to inject her with a cure, and she loses her abilities. He kind of beats her up inside the plane, and that's when they crash, pretty similar to the movie, except it doesn't have the whole like slow motion rotating like Matrix-ness of it. I assume he just knows he's going to do that anyway and stuff like that, so he doesn't even bother writing it into the script. But there is a little bit of a difference. So there's the scene of her surviving the crash and waking up and like walking away in the movie. And this, she actually like finds Wesker and like tries to make sure that he's dead. And then she leaves, or she actually like he actually is like still alive, and she breaks his neck and then walks away. But then there's like a little bit of a time jump, and they reveal that he is still alive, which is dumb, because if you're gonna bring him back, it's honestly more interesting if you lead us to believe he's dead and then just bring him back. At least that's the way I see it. So just like in the movie, we get a bit of a time jump. It's like 6 months later or something, and we cut to Alaska, and she's flying a plane trying to get to Arcadia. She has the little camcorder that she sets up there, and she talks to herself. So she lands in Alaska. A little bit of a difference here is, she gets to Arcadia. She finds like the graveyard of helicopters and buses and stuff. It's all pretty much the same from the movie. A little difference here is, in the movie, Claire just kind of shows up and like attacks her while she's searching the planes and stuff. In this version, she sits down, like records a few messages to herself on her camera. And then, she sees a figure that she chases into the forest, which turns out to be Claire. And, she's got a metal scarab on her chest that fans will recognize from the video game. It's literally a line in the script. And this is one of my problems with video game movies and Paul W.S. Anderson, specifically with his video game movies. He's done at this point 4 Resident Evil movies. Well, I guess he wrote all 6, so we'll just say he did 6. He only directed 4. He did Mortal Kombat. He did... I want to say there was another one. He's currently doing Monster Hunter, but I thought there was another video game movie in there. I might be mistaken. But in a lot of these movies, there's a lot of pandering to fans of the video game and stuff like that. But with the Resident Evil movies in particular, there's literally like 4 or 5 moments in the script where it's written, fans of the video game will see this in like basically swoon. And he makes such a big deal about it. And it's like tiny little references and stuff that he thinks that like fans are going to freak out about. Like, I'm sorry, but fans checked out of this series after the first movie when it wasn't like the video games at all. So just cramming stuff from the video games into the movies is not gonna make fanboys go crazy. It's a little more egregious later in the script, and I'll bring up that moment when we get there. But like little nods to the game that I think work are like camera angles. Because one thing about the Resident Evil games, it was like a fixed camera angle, and they utilize some of that in each one of these movies. There's like camera angles ripped right from the video games. Like a couple that I think of in the first movie. And the third movie is in the first one. There's like a scene where she's like is standing over a zombie and the camera's directly above her head, and it looks like an angle from the game. And then in the third one, there's like a scene of a door opening and the camera's like up against the door as it swings open, just like in the games when you open a door and it would zoom in for like the loading screen. Stuff like that. Those are nice, fun, subtle references to the game. But in this one, it's like you throw the scarab on her chest, which is supposed to be the mind control device from Resident Evil 5 that's on Jill Valentine, that you have to like get off of her. Like just throwing that in there for like coming up with a lame story reason to put something like that in the movie, it's just dumb to me. And it doesn't actually work. It doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't progress the story in any interesting way. It's just like this is in the game, so I found a way to write it into the movie. So she finds Claire with one of these on her. She manages to knock her out, and then we have them like camping by a fire and her asking her questions, and Claire doesn't remember anything, and she's got the amnesia thing. So then we cut to they're flying over the West Coast, looking for signs of life. Alice is talking to her camera, talking to Claire. Claire's not really answering anything. So for the most part, it's all pretty much been the same as the movie. But then we get a completely different scene that never showed up. So she flies to San Francisco, and they land the plane on the Golden Gate Bridge, which I'm pretty sure would be impossible if I recall the makeup of the bridge. Like maybe there's a way or a spot where a plane could fit, but I don't think that would actually be possible. But it is kind of a cool scene, like cool visual. Like I could picture that. Like with one thing about apocalyptic movies that is interesting is when you take landmarks from civilization and find interesting ways to use them. And I do think this is kind of like a fun, interesting way. Landing a plane on the Golden Gate Bridge and setting up a campsite. Like, that's fun. And so, there's a scene where she goes around checking cars for quarters, which is something that comes up later in the movie. But, they definitely make a big deal about it. Like, she finds quarters at the Arcadia dumping ground, and then she also finds quarters here on the bridge. And she's like, yeah, I got my bag of quarters. And there's, actually a line of dialogue about it. Alice tries to levitate a bottle with her mind just to, see if her powers are there. And it's kind of like that scene in X-Men 3 with Magneto trying to move the chess piece. It moves a little bit, but this is pretty much gone. So, Alice has a dream that Claire and Kmart show up. Kmart being the character from Resident Evil Extinction, the blonde girl played by Spencer Locke, I believe her name is. they show up in her dream, and then it turns out they're zombies, and she wakes up and she's pointing a gun or whatever, and Claire speaks to her for the first time and says that he's coming for them, but she won't say who is coming for them. Hint, hint. Like, honestly, there's some good character stuff in this that is like cut from the movie, and that was something I said on the last episode. Is I was kind of reading these scripts back to back. Like, I finished 3 and then immediately jumped into 4, so I made some references to 4 on the last podcast. But there's a lot of good character stuff in both of these scripts that gets cut. Like, this whole camping scene, I think kind of would have been fun to keep in. Like, I can see one of the reasons why you would cut it, because it does slow down the movie a little bit. Like, you have a camping scene in Arcadia, and then you have another one on the Golden Gate Bridge. Like, but you could take out that Golden Gate Bridge scene and put all of that dialogue into the other camping scene. And again, I'll have to rewatch the movie because maybe this happens and I don't remember it, but I'm pretty sure none of this really happens in the film. So I need to go back and check that out. So, okay, now we cut to the scene where they're flying over Hollywood, which from my memory is where we cut to after Arcadia. We see the Hollywood sign, and civilization pretty much burned down and on fire, but the streets are all empty. And it's like, hey, where are all the zombies? And then they find all the zombies surrounding a building in the middle of LA or Hollywood, which is a prison, which I don't know if there's a prison just in the middle of freaking Hollywood. Like, I don't think that's how that works, but for the sake of the movie, there's a prison in the middle of Hollywood. So, there's the whole scene where they're on top of the prison, they're signaling with flares, and they land the plane on the roof of the prison. She almost falls off, but they manage to catch it and like pull it back on. So, we have the scene where Alice and Claire meet the people in the prison. Angel, Luther, Bennett, Crystal. Bennett is like he's like the film producer guy who's like an asshole, and he has his assistant. Then there's Wendell, and I feel like there's one more character I'm missing. I will say this is one of the first of these scripts where all of the characters that are in this script are in the movie, and all of their fates are pretty much matched with the film. Most of them are pretty different in all the other movies. Characters are swapped around or renamed, or there's characters that aren't there, or their deaths are different. So clearly he's getting to a point where he kind of has a vision for these films. Or also maybe this is just a later draft compared to those other ones. I'm not 100% sure. So, Claire remembers a little bit of what's going on, because they find out Arcadia is like still a thing. The prisoners know about Arcadia as well, and it turns out that it's actually a boat. It's a giant like oil tanker that they can see from the top of the prison. They've been trying to signal it with flares, but to no avail. And they assumed Alice and Claire were from Arcadia because of the plane, and they tell them no, that they just found the place. And so spirits are a little hurt. So everybody settles into the prison. So we do get a glimpse of the Executioner from Resident Evil 5, and this is, once again, gamers will recognize it, but only this time he's being introduced because they're playing basketball on the roof, and like the ball goes flying down into the zombies surrounding the prison, and the Executioner is literally just like standing at the gate. In the movie, it's just like after they land on the prison, you see him just like walking in the streets towards the prison. And like the video games have kind of a reason for these like mutated looking characters, but it's never really explained. Like, mostly the only monsters in the Resident Evil movies are zombies, zombie dogs, and sometimes like some weird creatures, but it's never explained. Like the liquor was explained of like, what created that thing in the first film. The dogs are pretty obvious. They're just zombie dogs. But yeah, it's like the Executioner, like the Axeman. And then like in the 6th movie, they bring in one of the giant flying creatures, and like that shit's just never explained. It's just like, oh yeah, there's all these monsters. When it's like, yo, this was supposed to be like a zombie movie. They never lean that hard into like the biological weapon aspect of these creatures. So finally, we get to the one thing I wanted to read this script for, because it was the one thing that pissed me off about this movie. So in Resident Evil Afterlife, it takes place after the video game Resident Evil 5 has come out. And in Resident Evil 4 and 5, they were no longer zombies. Like the first 3 games, they were zombies and, you know, bioweapons and stuff like that. Resident Evil 4 was like a parasite. And, you know, they weren't zombies, but their mouths split open. Like, think if you watch Blade 2, what are they called? The Reapers or Reavers or something in Blade 2? They're like, you know, vampires. Their bottom jaw splits open. So it's basically like their mouth turns into like 4 fucking sections that just like latch onto their face. That happens in Resident Evil 4. It's like a parasite. And then in Resident Evil 5, it's a like continuation of that parasite, maybe like another mutated version that they can control better. And this also carries on into Resident Evil 6, but we're not going to talk about Resident Evil 6. But yeah, so in Resident Evil Afterlife, they just made the zombies act like that. There was nothing to explain it. It's just all of a sudden, hey, remember how these zombies used to be like slow and mindless? All of a sudden, they're like fast and their jaws open wide. And they're just the creatures from Resident Evil 5 and 4, even though it never made any sense. It was never fucking addressed. And I was like, there had to have been something cut here. Like, clearly, you couldn't have made that decision and not addressed it. Like, just as a writer, if you want some kind of continuity between your movies, and I know these movies are pretty fucking loose with the continuity, but still, there's a half freaking page of dialogue that completely covers this, and it was so frustrating to see that it was there and they cut it out. Because like literally it's just like, hey, do you notice they're getting faster? And, you know, they're changing. And Alice has a line of dialogue that even kind of explains it, of like, you know, like there's less people around now. They never used to have to be fast because food was everywhere. And now, you know, they're evolving because food is more scarce and they have to try to find and catch their food. Fucking put that in the movie. Like, it was the biggest freaking complaint I had about this movie. I'm glad that it was in the script. I'm glad he at least thought to write it, to put it down on paper and think, hey, yeah, we need an explanation for this. And it drives me insane that was not there. But it's in the script. Paul W.S. Anderson, we need to have a conversation. And this is going to be one of the first things I ask you about. Somebody make it happen, please. Somebody has to know this guy. Okay, so we go inside the prison cafeteria. You know, they meet the rest of the cast. And now we get introduced to Chris Redfield. You know, major character from the video games. Finally made his way into the movie, played by Wentworth Miller. And I would have liked to have seen more of him. I wish he did more of these movies, but I think he was just like, one and I'm out. Because his fate is never explained. He's just kind of written out, and it is what it is, you know. So we meet Chris in the basement and Wendell. You know, Chris is locked in the prison. They think he's a prisoner. He says he's military, that they were letting out the prisoners and they just locked him in there as a joke and blah, blah, blah. All this stuff is pretty much as it is in the movie. The dialogue's decent. You know, it's pretty similar to what's going on in the movie. So then the next day, Luther, you know, we got a present for you, and he gives Alice a shower. It's like, hey, you know, the water, you know, we can only keep it warm, but it's better than nothing. So Alice is going to go shower, but, you know, something's in there. She finds Wendell peeping on her, and, you know, he yells at her, or she yells at him, I mean. And he goes to run away, but zombies burst up through the floor and take him out, which leads to an action scene where they're shooting zombies that are coming in through the floor. They burrowed their way in. And I believe the scene is in the movie. It's been a little... This is one I'm a little foggy on. The Wikipedia didn't go into detail too much about this. But the scene is a little different in the script, I believe, because a lot of barrels of oil come into play. Like, they have them kind of all over the prison. Like, hey, oil's not a problem. Like, they got a lot of it, and they just use it for, like, torches and stuff like that. But, you know, they use it to burn the zombies that are coming up through the hole in the shower. So, you know, this kind of sets a fire under their ass. All right, we need to let Chris out. He says he knows a way out of here. So, you know, they go and let him down under protest, like Bennett, the movie producer. He doesn't want to let him out. He doesn't trust him. Nobody trusts him. But it's like they don't have a choice. So they let him out, and Claire and Chris meet for the first time. And the difference being in the script, when they see each other, they totally remember each other. And when Claire sees Chris, she's flooded with the memories of her life. And this is another part that really drove me crazy, is like the memories they show, they were going to put in memories from the video games that never happened in the movie. Like, they were going to recreate moments from Resident Evil 1 and 2 with these two characters. And like, oh, you know, it's enough to make any fanboy... Did I write down what he says? Yeah, he said, scenes that would make even the most cynical fanboy cry. And I just want to give him the biggest middle finger when he says something like that. I'm like, you're not going to manipulate me with this stuff. Like, that's not how it's going to work. I'm not going to enjoy it. It's cool to see moments from the video game, but it's like, I wanted to see those movies, and that's just not what you gave us. It probably would have been cool to see, like, oh yeah, that's cool. But no, I'm not going to fucking cry because you recreated the moment from the game 4 movies in, when you've completely deviated this franchise from what it should be. So, you know, Claire also remembers Alice and what she did for them. And, you know, she's kind of back. Like, she has all of her memories except for what happened when the people from Arcadia showed up. You know, very convenient. So now they have their plan. So Chris brings them down, shows them that, you know, there's an armored vehicle in the basement, but it's locked behind these doors. And they also need guns. So Chris, Alice, and Crystal are going to go get the guns, which they have to swim through the flooded sections of the prison basement to get to the armory. And Angel, Bennett, and his assistant, whose name I did not write down, and he's got some Asian name, so I'm not going to try to guess it because I'll fuck it up. They're going to try to cut the lock off the door to get the armored vehicle out. So Crystal, and Alice, God, everybody's names are so similar in this movie. They head towards the basement. There's in the movie, they just kind of swim their way through, and then as soon as they get out, Crystal gets grabbed and just pulled into the water as like a whole group of zombies come out, and Chris and Alice just shoot their way out of there and then, you know, get into the armory. In this version, it's a little more in depth. They swim through the area. They find a couple air pockets, and then Crystal, she's like, I'm a swimmer, so I'll go ahead. She was like a swimmer in high school or something. And she ends up coming, like, you know, she has like a glow stick, because there's all this talk about flashlights. They're very specific about their flashlights, and they're all almost dead, so we only have so much battery, you know, just trying to add some tension to it. And so she comes out of the water in like an air pocket, and there's like a zombie right there in her face. And then, you know, they show the glow stick just fall into the water. So Alice and Chris, you know, they're hanging back trying to catch more breath, but Alice decides to go ahead, and she finds like Crystal's glow stick in the water and like a severed arm and head. And then, you know, she goes up to the air pocket, and they're trying to build some tension. Like, she has her, like, you know, the zombie's supposed to be up there. She has her light. The light goes out, and then, you know, it's like, oh no, the light's gone out, but the zombie's there. But Chris shows up, you know, his light comes on. Alice gets pulled underwater by the zombie that killed Crystal, and there's another one under there. So, you know, she's trying to fight the zombie off. Chris shoots at it, but because they're underwater, the dampening of the water stops the bullet, and it doesn't kill the zombie. But so he like fires madly until one of the bullets actually does kill it. And then another zombie is in the water, and Alice just puts her gun straight to his head, blows his brains out. And then she lights the flare that she has, and it's actually like a cool scene. The tension is built pretty well. And so there's like 12 like just undead underwater, all like gross and bulbous because they're absorbing the water. They swim off and get into the armory. They get into the armory, they find all their guns, but like, oh, we kind of can't get out of here because of the way we came. But they look up and see a vent. Like, oh, we can just go through this vent, which is something it's a little frustrating in this movie. Like, he's just one of these writers who's like, oh yeah, vents. People climb through vents in action movies. Like he kind of just uses it as like a MacGuffin at this point. It's not really clever or interesting, but it's like whatever. It's keeping this movie going. So as they're using the vents to get back to the main level, Angel gets the door open to where the armored vehicle is. But Bennett just shoots him in the head because the engine is dismantled. So it's like, shit, they get it open, but the engine, like, they can't drive it. It would take them a week to get the engine put back together. But zombies are apparently just burrowing in every which way now. So as this was all going on, Claire and Luther were like heading towards the kitchen to load up bags of supplies. And as that's going on, zombies are coming in through the walls, coming up through the floor. And, they're shooting them, and then they end up locking them in the kitchen. And then they hear them just start clawing through the walls, and they run away. It's like zombies are just, like, excavating this prison at this point. Angel says, they can't rebuild the engine, so Bennett just shoots him. And then he decides to take the plane. And everything from this point is pretty much dead on with the movie up until they get to the boat. So Bennett takes the plane, almost falls off, like skids across the ground, cuts up a bunch of zombies, but gets away. The zombies swarm the roof. All the survivors are up there, and they're shooting at them. Some of them get to the elevator and take the way down. They're going to go meet in the showers because Alice tells them to. Alice throws the explosives on the ground, swings off the roof, and the roof explodes. She just swings down to the ground and is just shooting in midair. I rewatched this scene before I recorded this, and I can't believe I even give this movie the time of day because it's so ridiculous. First of all, the CG on the swing the CG in this movie is not great, and I think a lot of that has to do with like the 3D and stuff. Just trying to make it pop in 3D, but also just these movies are made super cheap. Yeah, so she's like swinging down and like shooting at zombies. She finally reveals what the quarters are for. She pulls out her shotguns and shoots them, and she was making shotgun shells with the quarters, which is something I would actually like to know if that's real or not. I've seen other movies do stuff like that where they put stuff inside shotgun barrels, and like even in The Crow, he like puts all those engagement rings into the barrel of the shotgun, and when he shoots them, they just fly out. I wonder if that is actually true. I feel like that would just blow up the gun, but I'm not an expert, so maybe if somebody could point me to that information, I would actually like to see that. She makes it down to the ground. Luther has the door open, and she's running through the crowd of zombies, and they make it to the showers, and her plan is to climb through the hole that the zombies burst up through. It's like, if this has to lead to the sewers lead to runoff, which leads to the ocean. So, and then they can find a boat and get to Arcadia. So that's what they do. But before that happens, don't forget about the Axeman. So when Bennett took the plane, the controls for the gate were also up on the roof. He opened the gate and broke the controls so they couldn't shut the gates. So zombies are just pouring in now. Also with the zombies was the Axeman, which I believe in the movie it's just the Axeman comes and just knocks down the gate. Because again, it's a little different in the movie. In the script, he's just standing there the whole time, but in the film, I believe he shows up and knocks down the gate. While they're sitting there like debating, going down in the hole, it's Claire and Alice are the last ones left in the bathroom with the assistant guy, and he just gets decimated by the axe. Just comes down and slices him in half. All this is mostly the same except the way he gets killed. So The fight scene is the same. I'm not going to sit here and describe the fight scene, but if you go watch the movie, it's the same. They do take him down to his knees, except the difference in the movie is they blow his head off with the shotgun and the quarters. In the script, they basically just talk about, they pump him full of these shotgun shelled quarters, and he eventually drops to his knees, and then they shoot him in the eyes. And it's just like, okay, you shot him in the face, he's dead. It's pretty lame, honestly. Like, if you're going to introduce this character, like, just having his head explode is a much better and more believable death. So, they go into the underground, and at this point it's Chris, Claire, and Alice and Luther. Luther gets, pulled into the ground by some zombies, and they assume he's dead. But they make it through. This whole scene is extended. I don't remember if this happens in the movie. This is one thing I was trying to find a scene for it on YouTube, and I didn't find it. If they actually show them crawling through the tunnels, I thought it was just they kill the Axemen and then it cuts to them on the boat. But maybe I'm wrong. So in this, there's a little extended scene of them crawling through the tunnels, but Luther gets pulled away. And that's the thing. I don't remember how Luther disappears in the film, so maybe this is in there. I don't remember it. So forgive me if it is actually there. So yeah, they make it out. Alice has one of the detonators from the armory left, and she blows up their path, like blocking them from the zombies that were following them. And then they take a boat to Arcadia. So one thing I need to point out about this script, because some of this is missing, is whatever like photocopy has made it onto the internet, there's parts of the script that are missing. And it was fine up until this point. But at this point, there's literally like pages missing. There's like only a couple parts of a page. It kind of looks like something was placed over it as it was photocopied, as maybe to not show certain parts. So there are little things I'm missing here. But they check out the boat. They see that the lifeboats were launched 3 days ago. The boat seems pretty much empty. They go to the lower levels and they find the giant doors with the umbrella logo. So, bad stuff. Alice, they're exploring the boat. They find prisoners. I'm unclear of how they find the prisoners. In the movie, it's like they pull up in electric or like a white, what's it called? Like a tablet. And they find people listed on the tablet, and they find Kmart, and they rescue her, and then that leads into the Wesker fight. But in this version, it seems like they find basically like prison cells, but it was hard to tell because parts of the script were literally just missing. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I didn't have that. So while they're like helping Kmart, Alice, she's like going through the ship, like trying to find. She assumes that Wesker's here. She comes across the VTOL. There's one like parked in an open hangar, and then she moves past it, or does she? If you've seen the movie, you already know what happens. So she finds Wesker in a room. It's a little different because like in the film, they recreate the fight scene from Resident Evil 5, and he literally just is like the version of Wesker in Resident Evil 5, like basically just like superhuman. In this version, he's kind of like the Ouroboros monster from Resident Evil 5, which is like a dude covered in like black slimy slugs. So like she finds him, he's like in a room with like a glass desk, and he's just like head on the desk, almost like he's dead, and he's got like an arm that's like bulbous and like slimy. I also thought maybe he was going to be like the leech man, like Marcus from Resident Evil 0, the video game, but it definitely seems a little more Ouroboros related. So if you've played Resident Evil 5, you know what I'm talking about. But Ouroboros is basically just like a bunch of like black slimy slugs that like form over a person, and they're just like another type of bioweapon. So yeah, like the fight scene plays out a little differently from the film. The Wesker has the dogs that like listen to him. There is the scene where she kicks the glass into the dog and it like cuts him up. So like she has the shotgun and like they shoot glass that's like above her, and as glass is coming down, she karate kicks a giant chunk of glass and it flies into one of the dogs and kills him, which is whatever. But in the script, it literally says she kicks the glass, the big shard of glass hits the dog and sticks the dog into the metal wall. And excuse me, but that is not how glass works. Glass is not going to stick in a fucking metal wall. Ridiculous. Like, I hope somebody read that and just like, no, you can't do this. Because like in the movie, it's the same, but it doesn't stick in the wall. It just hits the dog in midair and the dog just like plops to the ground. And so it's a little ridiculous. So Bennett, he's one thing that was kind of unclear in the film is like when Bennett shows up, like he's allied with Wesker, and they have a line that's like, oh, you look a little sick there. And I thought maybe it's like, oh, he got infected on the way in. But one stupid thing is like while she's exploring the ship, she's checking dead bodies, and like apparently her powers allow her to see through a dead body's eyes, so she sees the final moments of his life and sees like something feeding on him. And so I guess the idea was that Wesker was feeding on Bennett but just didn't kill him, just like draining blood from him, and that's why he looks sick. But yeah, it's like totally kind of just like a throwaway line in the movie, and it's very unclear. So yeah, Wesker, he grabs some shards of glass and he's just like attacking her with his super speed, and she's trying to dodge, but she's getting all cut up. Bennett keeps trying to interfere. He stabs her in the arm with an axe, but which I believe in the movie is like a knife or something. So she takes the axe out of her arm and stabs Wesker in the side of the head, which doesn't kill him, but is enough to distract him. And then during this distraction, Bennett's going to kill Alice, but Chris shows up and holds a gun on him, and then Claire shows up and blows Wesker's head apart with a shotgun. And they lock Bennett. They leave him in there. They lock Bennett in the room, and they walk out. But the pieces of his brain, the brain matter, on the ground, they turn into these slugs, and they form back into Wesker's head, which is way more ridiculous than what actually happens. Because in the movie, if you remember, Wesker, he has like something come out of his mouth, like a tentacle or something, similar to when the zombie's mouth split open. It's just his mouth doesn't split open. It just comes out of him. And then they just shoot him in the head with a shotgun and leave him there for dead. Similar thing happens, except they literally just like blow his head apart and his head reforms. And he's kind of just like Slugman is how they describe him. He's like all slimy and kind of struggling to survive and come together. So he comes together and feeds on Bennett to survive. And then he escapes to the VTOL that you saw parked, and he flies off and hits the button to purge the facility, just like he does in the beginning when they blow up Tokyo. And this part, it pretty much just plays out exactly like the movie. The ship says it's going to explode, and Alice is like, quick, we got to get out of here. And they run up to the top of the ship, and then it turns out the bomb was actually taken out of the ship and put in the VTOL. Because of the scene where she was walking by, she saw the VTOL, she put the bomb in there, and the VTOL blows up instead. And she's just like, they ran to the top. She's like, well, I didn't want you to miss it. And then the movie progresses, the script progresses exactly as the movie ends. They let everybody out. They decide they're going to use Arcadia to actually find survivors. And then a bunch of like swarm of VTOLs show up with Jill Valentine leading the charge, having survived and having one of those mind control devices on her chest, just like in the video game. Cut to credits. The only difference being that's like a mid-credit scene in the movie. And that's Resident Evil Afterlife. And that's our special little Halloween episode. That half page of dialogue explaining that the zombies are evolving. I needed that in the movie. I needed it so bad. And honestly, the only reason I'm doing this episode is because of that half page. Like, that is the fucking thing with this movie, that it needed to be there. Like, you're not supposed to treat your audience like idiots, but you still have to give them the elements of the story to make it make sense. And this movie not only treats the audience like idiots, it completely leaves them in the dark just because it assumes that, like, oh, anyone who's seeing this movie played the video games. And like, this movie made $300 million when it came out. So the fact that this scene was left out is kind of crazy, because clearly more people than just who played the video games are going to see these movies. Like, they're becoming hits. And, you know, they make these movies for 30 million. They make fucking 300 million. Like, it's insane. It's just, it's one of those things like, oh, you can just assume that they're evolving. But like, the fact that there was like a half page not only saying that they're evolving, but describing why they're probably evolving was crucial to me. And it was one of the things that always bugged me about this movie. And it's like, I'm glad that it's in the script, because at least I can acknowledge that that's what's happening. And I don't just have to assume everything, because you shouldn't leave your audience to assume fucking your whole movie, or at least a major plot point to the movie. But yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say about this. Like, as much as that stuff frustrates me, the fifth movie is so much more egregious about it, which is why I'm kind of interested to read that script. But if it is just the shooting script, I have a feeling a lot of the problems in that movie just aren't really addressed. That one is it has such an interesting concept for a film, but it's such a shit show of a Resident Evil movie. I don't even know. But that's kind of what we're looking at in the future. I am going to check out Resident Evil Retribution and see if it's worth doing an episode on. If not, I will let you know that it's not coming, so you don't have to sit there and wait for that nonsense. But I have two scripts that I'll be looking at coming up to decide which one I want to do. One of them is the Mortal Kombat reboot. The other is the original version of Batman Returns when it was called Batman 2. I started reading that. It was super interesting. It's written by the same guy who kind of did the original drafts of Tim Burton's Batman. That went through quite a few rewrites, but it's one of the guys who was involved. Sam Hamm is his name. I don't know if he has if he was the guy who came in and finished Batman or did the first draft that somebody else then rewrote, but same guy involved with both movies. And it's like a version with Vicky Vale is still in it, so it's like an interesting version that I've been trying to build up to a Batman Forever script that I want to get to, or like whatever it was called at that time, or maybe it's actually the fifth Batman movie. That there's like one of them that has Harley Quinn in it that I'm trying to get up to for Birds of Prey, which I believe is February. So I'm trying to like kind of cover the other Batman scripts along the way. So there might be a lot of Batman in the near future, but I'll try to break them up with some other stuff. But yeah, so that's going to be it for today's episode. That's Resident Evil Afterlife. I was super excited to actually record this episode, and it's a fun one to talk about. And the way that movie is heavily flawed, it's also kind of extremely fun. And just seeing the stuff that I wish was... Honestly, the script has like a more cohesive version of that story with like a little more character development, and you're not seeing the ridiculous action that is going on screen, so maybe it's not so bad. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's episode. Keep your eye out for whatever those future episodes are. I might stick with the video game motif and go Mortal Kombat, or I might do Batman 2 since I already kind of started that. I still have plenty of time for Birds of Prey, so either way, those will probably be the next two. It just depends on the order of which I'm going to do them. So, be sure to follow us or follow me. I'm kind of just doing this myself on Twitter and Instagram at Shelved Podcast. I am tongue twisting up a storm right now. We're on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook, Shelved Podcast. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/shelved. I couldn't remember it on the last podcast, but I got it now. And as always, you can email the show at shelvedfilmpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to help out the show, the Patreon is the best way to do it. Also, just dropping a review on your podcast app. If you're listening to it on the Apple Podcast app, super easy to do. Barely an inconvenience. Just go there and hit the write a review. You can even just give us a rating. Just give us a 5-star rating. That's a good way to help the show. The best way is a Patreon. If you want to hit up the Patreon and, throw whatever your way, there's some cool rewards on there. So if you want a possibility for a t-shirt or something like that, you can go to the Patreon. We are going to have a t-shirt store pretty soon. It's going to be coming to the upgraded Shirtsicle website that goes through my work, 1 Hour Tees, Pro Wrestling Tees. The website's kind of being redone, and when it's redone, I'm going to be throwing up my store, so some shelved shirts will be available soon. And honestly, the best way to support the show would be to buy a shirt, because for each shirt sold, that covers 1 month of server costs, and all of that money is just going to go back into the show. So that's the best way to support the show. But yeah, I'll let everybody know when those are up. I got a couple designs already made. There's going to be probably 4 designs to start with. 2 black shirts, and then 2 shirts that don't have white ink, probably on like a sport gray or something. And one of them is just kind of like a logo shirt. The other one like has some text to go with it. Pretty simple designs made by my boy Dave Stankin, or Dave Stank. I'm used to his screen name. He's one of our designers over at 1 Hour Tees, Pro Wrestling Tees. But he was kind enough to make some shirt designs for me, and maybe in the future I'll get some more. Maybe you guys can give me some ideas of like what would be cool on some shirts. But yeah, so be sure to look out for that. I'll let you know. I'll post it on the social medias and drop it on the episode, just so you know. But thanks for listening, and be sure to check back for our next episode.